So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking a bit of time out from your busy days to join us. This is our first IRM speaker session as part of Risky Business 2022, which is Turnkey's attempt at providing both our existing and future customers with some high quality content, which is both current, topical, hopefully thought-provoking in nature, and hopefully will resonate with some of the key risk-related challenges and decisions that you may be wrestling over at the moment. I'm positive that the insights being shared over the next couple of days by both Turnkey colleagues, as well as our expert speakers, including valuable customer case studies, will help your own thought process regarding what your next step should be, and hopefully put you in a much better place really to continue these discussions within your own organizations. We certainly hope that you'll gain some real value from it. Towards the end of this session, I'll provide a quick rundown of both today's and tomorrow's IRM schedule for you, as I'm positive there'll be some topics and challenges that will strike a chord with the majority of our audience, along with some useful takeaways as well, hopefully. So please do your best to attend them. As a reminder, by virtue of in this session right now, you're already registered and signed up to the conference as a whole, and that provides you with access to all of the sessions taking place. So there's no need to register for each session individually. So you can just turn up, sit back, and soak up the content. By way of a quick introduction, my name's Mark Jackson. I'm the Practice Director for Integrated Risk Management at Turnkey UK, meaning that I'm responsible for the service offerings and solutions that we provide to our clients within the IRM practice. I've been involved in the area of security, risks and controls for over 20 years now. My experience ranges across the design and implementation of security solutions, internal risk and control frameworks, as well as advising clients on their GRC technology solutions in pursuit of that integrated approach to managing risk. I'm delighted to be joined today by our guest speaker, Stefan Gasheta. Stefan has a vast amount of experience as a risk management practitioner and has held many senior positions across several UK companies. I've had the pleasure of Stefan's company during some previous risk-related webinars, and he's always got some really valuable insights and points to make. And I'm sure today's topic regarding finding the value and opportunity in risk will be no different. So Stefan, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I love risk. I'm a real passionate advocate for my art, and actually, I'll pick myself up there straight away. I'm a passionate advocate for my science, which is what I believe it is. Combining human sciences, organizations, mathematics, economics. You know, I've spent a long time thinking about how to help people take better decisions more quickly, and that's what I think risk is for. I think risk is just about decision making. I started out life in the Royal Navy, and that's really where this interest began. And as Mark said, I've held a number of head of risk positions, and now latterly director of risk in FTSE organisations. And my motivation and my driving passion, people overuse the word passion, I think, in relation to their jobs. I think very few people are lucky enough to be genuinely passionate about what they do, but I'm one of those lucky few. I'm absolutely convinced that risk is at the heart of better decision making, better governance, and ultimately creating a competitive advantage by taking better decisions more quickly. As one of my catch lines, but I think that's fundamental to what we're talking about today, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Stefan. Great to have you. So before we kick off our discussion, let's probably just remind ourselves quickly of the ground that we'll be covering today. So we're going to kick off this IRM track with this keynote session, where we'll explore a perspective of risk that doesn't always tend to be the main area of focus, and that's opportunity, and finding the value associated with risk. So we've got a really interesting discussion, I think, coming up on that topic. It's very easy to focus on risk as something that is inherently bad in nature, and the usual negative connotations come up when the word risk is mentioned, and seeing risk as something to avoid at all costs. In addition, the ever-changing risk and compliance landscape at the moment is keeping everyone on their toes, which only helps to reinforce these kind of traditional views. But this session is about why you should also start to pay more attention to the value and the opportunity associated with risk, and why or how you can take advantage of this by starting to take a more value-based approach to risk management. So without further ado, let's make a start. And I'm going to begin by asking Stefan to explain this very colourful diagram on the next slide.
Yeah,
and how this relates to finding the opportunity in risk.
I'm known for some fairly arcane analogies. This one I think is a relatively simple one. So for amateur physicists amongst you, or even for those of you who occasionally pick up a copy of The New Scientist or equivalent on the web, this is a diagram, or this is a representation of something really fundamental to the universe. It shows what's known as the Higgs boson, or the Higgs particle, which is basically one of the fundamental particles to the universe. It makes up matter. I am not a physicist, so I'm not going to attempt to explain it fully to you. But the essence of it is that the Higgs particle is what gives matter, everything that the world's made of, everything we can see and not see, gives it its mass. So without the Higgs particle, my stapler here wouldn't have any actual mass, wouldn't exist to all intents and purposes. And it's that particle, it's that one particle that really defines it as matter and something we can see. The reason that I think this is a relevant analogy, and the reason why I think it's worth understanding it a little bit in a risk context, is because that's how I feel about risk. In this context, the Higgs particle is replaced by value. So value creation, value protection. You could also talk about purpose. You could talk about different kinds of capital. All of those things we might touch on as we have a chat today, Mark. But fundamentally, value for me is what gives risk its substance. It's what gives risk its meaning. Doesn't matter whether you're a lawyer looking at compliance, or you're a strategy person looking at the risks associated with entry into a new market, and everything in between, product development, HR, people, manufacturing, services. It doesn't matter what aspect of risk or what element of risk you're interested in. I think my thesis, as it's evolving as I progress through my career, is that actually it's value creation. Risk starts and ends with value creation and value protection, and that's what gives risk its importance. Some of us will refer to that as materiality, but without that value, understanding how we create and protect value, for me, risk management, risk activities are fundamentally a lot less meaningful.
So that's an interesting take on it. So what you're saying in effect is that it's value that drives the risk, not the other way round. And risk is just a byproduct of that. You know, there's risk associated with trying to generate that value, but the focus is on generating the value, and then understanding what the risks are associated with it, and manage that accordingly based on your, tolerance thresholds and your appetite.
I mean, we could play a little game to kind of to bottom this out. So if I said to you that you're going to stand at one side of the M25, and on the other side of the M25 is a fiver, would you take the various risks? And we probably don't have time to explore them, but when I do this in a classroom environment, we talk about the various risks, like the cars, obviously, the weather, the time of day, all that kind of stuff. Mm. Would you accept those risks to go and get the fiver?
Probably not enough, to be honest.
Probably not enough. So you've kind of proved the point already. You've already said not enough. So what you're implying is there is a value, at which point we can balance that risk equation, and we can say, okay, those risks are now acceptable. Now we'll all have our own number, or maybe it's not money that would motivate you. Maybe it's another kind of reward that you'd be motivated to take those risks to do. But that's kind of my point. Mm-hmm. Businesses need to understand what kind of value it is that they're creating, how they create that value, And for me, that includes, yes, finance, but clearly also ESG. And at the moment, I'm particularly interested in reputational capital. So not reputational risk, but how do I generate sort of brand capital, if you like, that reflects well and helps grow the business. But then understanding that in the first instance means that any risks you identify then are that much more meaningful. On a very human level, Mark, the other advantage to this, so that's kind of a mathematical risk management-y advantage. My materiality discussions are suddenly much easier because I can relate everything to individual value milestones. But on a human level, I'm trying to think how long I've been doing this. Nearly 25 years. On a human level, people don't want to actually talk about risk. It's going to come as a surprise to you, but they don't. Risk is temporarily diverting and interesting. And by people, I mean the business leaders, the P&L leaders, the people who own the budgets that they can spend on risk systems. What they far rather talk about is the value that they're creating. They want to talk about the exciting stuff that they're doing. They want to talk about products that they're creating. If you and I go into business making these things, we need to know about the risks, absolutely, that's around that. But fundamentally, we want to talk about what we're passionate about. In any business that I've been involved in, whether that's heavy industry through to now luxury, manufacturing, asset management, the passion, as we're going back to that, I didn't realize that would be a topic today, but the passion that people feel isn't from risk. It's going to come as a shock to all of us, but the passion comes from doing the stuff that they get really excited about, doing the stuff that they're good at, and that invariably is producing something, selling something, fulfilling customers' needs and desires, achieving targets. I sometimes say, to start off a risk discussion, I start by asking, what's going to get you promoted? What's going to get you your bonus next year? They start talking about targets. So we as risk practitioners should be talking about those targets first and foremost.
That is an interesting insight, because like you say, particularly those senior executives within an organization, they're interested in obviously making the business as successful as possible. And that means creating value, like you say, and focusing on that. So where risk management functions may have problems having that relationship and communication with the senior executives in the past, could be because, like you say, perhaps they're more focused on the risk side. So it's all negative, and it's detracting away from potentially that value that the executives are focused on. Whereas if you flip the conversation a little bit and actually focus on the value, but at the same time you're there to manage the risks associated with it, but you're more value focused and value driven, it helps probably with those conversations, and they can see that they are not there to just stop doing things which were going to create value for the organization. You're there to do it in a sustainable and sensible way, and helping to manage that process.
I mean, let's think of it in these terms. It's just much more polite to ask questions about what motivates an individual, rather than me bowling into someone's office and telling them all the stuff that could possibly go wrong.
Go wrong, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's be British about this. It's more polite to ask a question than it is to start dictating. And I think, to tie it back to one of the bullets, I said I would try to do that, but to tie it back to one of the bullets in one of your intro slides, if we just let risk management become lists of terrifying things that might happen, it's just boring. It is really boring. Where those risks come alive is if you link them to either logically or probabilistically to something exciting, and that something exciting is, for me, is value creation, and value creation in different ways.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's move on to this next slide then, Stefan. So this is what you talk about as your kind of continuum, this continual flow of information.
A slightly highfalutin way of describing a line. I mean, Yeah, I think this sort of develops that idea a little bit further. So if we want to understand how a business creates value, we need to understand the market that we're operating in. And a boss of mine at EY explained consulting in these terms, that in order to be a successful Big Four consultant, or I guess any kind of consultant, you need a market, you need a route to market, and you need a right to play in that market, i.e. you need something to sell to it. And that really got me thinking, you know, the market and the route to market side of things isn't something that's often discussed by us risk types. That's often left to others. But for me, it's fundamental. If we are agreed that value creation is a useful additional dimension to discuss when we're thinking about risk and therefore decisions to take around how to improve the likelihood of us achieving those value targets, if we're agreed that value is important, you need to understand the market in which that value is created. So this is really talking about those external risks, that external view on the world, and you know, taking I think a very data-driven approach to understanding, you know, fundamentally is my market becoming more or less permissive. And I think there your opportunity is, particularly in this data era, is to have that more automated, more dynamic update on the conversation around setting milestones, setting targets. You know, what do we think we can do in our market this year, next year, year after? I don't know. The companies who monitor their markets in real time so that they can adjust, they can course adjust accordingly. I think we'll have an advantage here. And from a risk perspective, it's very interesting. It's very useful. You know, you're talking about principal risks. This is probably that territory, or at least covers off a lot of that territory. So when I go in front of the board, I've got a consistent and baselined approach to analysing those big external strategic principal risks.
And when you mention milestones, those value milestones, because that's a term that's quite new to me, and I'm sure it might be to a few members of our audience. Are strategic objectives close to what you would refer to as value milestones? Or if they're slightly different, what are those differences between them?
Yeah, no, I think you're right to pick me up on that. No, that's useful. I'm possibly slightly loose with my terminology. I use them synonymously, if I'm honest. I mean, I think the reason that they're synonyms is with objectives is because, you know, I think it's hard to point to an objective, a binary objective that an organization ever really achieves. I think they evolve into new objectives. And so I came up with this idea of milestones to sort of describe that constantly changing future picture that the risk the risk effort needs to support. And so the milestones are casting out as far out as your sort of financial plans go, so typically 3 or 4 years, and working out what the really big moves are that you've got to make. What are the big deliverables that you as a corporation have? And you start at that level. What are the big strategic goals that we need to achieve, to your point? And what are the milestones? What are the steps along the way to achieving them that we know if we achieve them that we're making the right pace of progress? And it's in that context that we started thinking much more around, well, we as a company are judged not just on our financial performance, but interrelated to that financial performance is how we do in terms of environmental and social responsibility. So looking at natural capital, so looking at how we create environmental capital, how we create and protect social capital. And then for any business where brand is important, which mine at the moment very much is, how do you create, protect and enhance reputational capital? And so we're looking at an approach that involves something called a value creation framework. So all that serves to do is to help the decision makers understand, well, if I want to do one particular thing, what kinds of value can I extract from that deliverable? So an example might be, we might launch a particular product that might be particularly useful in terms of bringing a new material to the market. So potentially we're using innovative materials. Financially, maybe not actually that helpful. The margin may be less than we'd normally accept, and I'm speaking in hypotheticals now. It bears repeating, but actually environmentally makes an awful lot of sense. So there's value there that's being created that's not financial. Socially, maybe more beneficial to our workers, who knows, or the communities that support our workers. And then reputationally, you could see that example standing you to do a lot of good. That value creation framework helps you equate those different kinds of value, and for the decision makers who aren't risk people, but help those decision makers understand what they want to prioritize and what they want to pursue. To bring it back to risk, then, those milestones are essential to me. They're where this all starts, because if I understand my external risks, then we can say whether that value is, we've gone over optimistic or under optimistic. Should we be pushing harder? I can only tell you that by analysing the external risk, and then by pushing harder. If we set some milestones at the start of the year, but you and I decide, actually, no, we want to make more of these because the market's growing quicker than we anticipated. The internal risks, the stuff that I can affect directly, we're going to have to take some different decisions around that, around people, around manufacturing, around supply chain, and the controls that are commensurate with those kinds of risks. And this, by the way, applies to, all kinds of risks, as I said at the start, including compliance, including assurance, including enterprise and strategic level risk. They all get given their mass, they all get given their importance by those key milestones.
Yeah, okay. And you touched on internal controls there.
Yeah.
So with internal controls typically being one source of risk response to help reduce risk to an acceptable level based on risk tolerance of an organization, should we be viewing the role of internal controls in a slightly different way when we're focusing more on the value and the opportunity, or is it still play the same role?
I think it's the same role philosophically, but I think you can just be a lot more targeted. So what I mean by that is, if you understand the value of your risks, so if you understand how valuable your risks are that you're taking, so what is the value that would be unlocked, or what's the value that's being protected by, say, a particular people risk, recruiting and retaining the right talent. It's really only by understanding that you can decide how much to spend on controls, because that just becomes a ratio. So if you say, right, well, I'm going to earn, back to yours and my business that I'm very excited about, by the way, but if we go back to our stapler business, we work out that there's 10 million in profit there a year. If you think about it, the amount you spend on controls has to be a sensible ratio according to the people risk to producing those staplers. I only want to spend a certain amount on controlling it, which is, for me, quite a practical manifestation of risk appetite, which we might come on to.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess then that enables you to do that bit more of a cost benefit analysis and really understand, well, are these controls actually worthwhile having in place, or are we just over egging it based on the value we're protecting here?
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and what you're intimating, and I think that's right, is where can we take control out? Where are we over controlled? Because I think, again, that is perhaps a less popular discussion. You know, we tend to want to throw more and more control in there. Not always the answer. Do we need to consolidate, rationalize controls? Who do we want to enact those controls? Is that us? Is that a third party? But it also brings in two other dimensions around control, which is, for me, risk transfer. So you're talking about insurance, and then also risk tolerance. So, you know, talking to Treasury and saying, look, what does a bad day look like for you? And starting the conversation with them on this, and working out from a controls perspective, what do I actually have to wrestle this risk down to? It's really only Treasury that can tell you the answer to that, to say, well, we've got X in the bank, we've got Y in terms of debt, so we can cover ourselves for a certain amount. And after that, Stefan, you and your team need to have managed those risks down to this level. The other is just touching briefly on another one of my passions, which is alliances. You see, you've got an alliance there that may be not a typical risk alliance with your strategy colleagues. The other alliance that is absolutely key to this, and they're really driving this, is FP&A. You know, financial planning. You know, they're the guys who are going to really help you understand these milestones. But perhaps another topic for another time is whether financial planning needs to become value planning, and looking at these different kinds of value that you've put up here in a very timely fashion.
Yeah, so you mentioned about the different, this could be applied to different categories of risk, and I guess this is some of those dimensions that they would fit into in terms of that value creation.
That's it. Yeah, and there'll be a school of thought that says that these can be fairly generic, but I think the more closely you align these kinds of different sort of value discussions, and these are just examples clearly, but the more closely you align them to your business, it gets back to that point about why people get out of bed and come to work for you in the mornings. You know, what is it? What is the difference that they're making? What's the value that we're creating across these different dimensions? For other businesses, there may be additional dimensions, but for me, these are the core ones that really matter to us. I suppose it's worth noting at this stage the challenges associated with this kind of approach. One that may leap out to more data savvy people in people who are watching this would be very hard to quantify social value. That tends to be more of a subjective discussion. Very happy to receive feedback on that, by the way. If anyone can help me with that. I mean, we're thinking about sort of ROI on CSR projects, for example. When you invest in a community, you know, what benefit are you measuring off the back of that? That's why brand and reputation bridges all of these, because usually when you make those kinds of investments, when you just do the right thing, it's sometimes a bit diffuse. It's sometimes a bit hard to see where the return is coming. Environmental, increasingly, as again, people will be aware, carbon pricing, as that becomes more formal, as those markets become established, that is going to link back to dollar. That's going to link back to money. So increasingly, environmental will be you'll measure risk against that sort of environmental delivery. Challenge there, though, is because we're very carbon focused as a global economy when it comes to this kind of capital. But it's very hard to measure other kinds of environmental value, like biodiversity. So biodiversity, not that it's subjective. You can go out there with something called a quadrant, throw it onto a bit of land, and you can count all the species in a particular square meter of field. But that takes a very long time. You know, ecosystems take decades to recover from potential damage or to be enhanced. So how do you know that your risks are actively managing that? Aside from just looking at standards.
So just quickly, sorry, Steph. I'm just quickly looking at the clock.
Yeah, sure.
I've lost track of time. We've got probably about a minute left, and I'm wary that you've also got another slide here, and we could go on forever.
I did say I was a passionate advocate.
Which is great to hear. So I didn't want to stop you either. But how many are you seeing many organizations using this approach? Or, you know, if say organizations, anyone listening wants to take a bit more of this approach, what's the best way for them to try and to start with that?
I think for me, it's those alliances. I think for me, it's talking to the people, the first and foremost your P&L leaders. If you want better conversations with the guys who are basically managing your budget, which they are, if you want them to pull on you, talk to them in a language that makes sense to them, and it ain't risk. It's something different, as we've discussed. It's that thing, it's that passion that you need to understand their passion for that. And then I think it's about alliances. I think it's I mean, as I said, I'm thinking a lot about this. It's definitely with the financial planners. It's definitely with your CSR teams to understand how you're creating that natural value. It's with your corporate comms team to understand reputation. This is all from my perspective. And then it's with the likes of Treasury to understand risk tolerance in a way that's really, really useful. I've seen you just pop this slide just to caption this. It's a great place to finish. Risk isn't good or bad. That's what I'd love. If there's one message to take away from today, delete from your minds that risk is somehow synonymous with threat. That's the least helpful approach to risk I think there can be. For every event that happens, there could be a set of bad outcomes and a set of good outcomes. And your job, my job as a risk person, is to help decision makers understand what those outcomes are and how to shape them.
Stefan, it's been a pleasure as always. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and like I say, we could go on forever on this. So maybe another webinar in the not too distant future is something we can line up for this anyway. It sounds like there's plenty of other related topics we could expand on. But you shared some really interesting points there. I'm sure many of the listeners are going to get a lot of value from the things that you've been discussing today. But yeah, like I say, we're out of time. I also want to spend a little bit of time just quickly signposting some of the upcoming sessions within the conference agenda before we wrap up today. Unfortunately, say we're not going to have time to take questions on this session. If anybody's got any questions they want to ask us outside, we've got the contact details at the end, and we can happy to answer those at that point. So looking at the remaining agenda, we've got a variety of topics around the risk controls and compliance theme, involving a number of subject matter experts from both Turnkey as well as those within our risk partner ecosystem. In addition, we've also delighted to welcome a few of our valued clients who kindly offered to talk about some risk-related challenges that they've encountered and how they've been able to meet them with some interesting and innovative solutions as well. For the remainder of today's agenda, as well as tomorrow, we've got a number of guest speakers who are experts in the field of risk management and internal controls. I know will provide some great insights for you all. The first of our guest speakers is our friends Alan Gall and Neil Patrick from SAP. They'll be accompanied by Sven Piper from our German team, whom during our next session at 2 p.m. today will be having a panel discussion regarding a new cloud-based SAP product designed for managing internal controls. That's called SAP Financial Compliance Management. Hot on the heels of this at 2:45 p.m. we'll be joined by Julianne McGarry, Senior Lecturer at Birmingham City University, who specialises in internal controls, risk and internal audit, and she'll be explaining the 10 fundamental things that all businesses need to have in place to set them up for success when managing the ever-changing risk and controls regulatory landscape. And looking at day 2 tomorrow, we're looking forward to tomorrow's schedule at 2:45 p.m. We've also welcomed Dominic Henry, Director of Range Consulting. He'll explain his calm seas of business change, an approach highlighting and discussing why risk and control should be a key part of your S/4HANA implementation. So that's another one in the RM track. So as you can see, there's, along with the other sessions from the other practice areas, we've got a very full couple of days ahead, which I'm sure will be jam-packed, interesting, and provide some useful insights. Hopefully providing a catalyst to help you also begin to make a positive change within your own organization. So lastly, I'd just like to thank you all for listening. Again, thanks, Stefan, once again for joining us and sharing your valuable insights. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, please feel free, as I mentioned, to contact me. I can also pass on any questions to Stefan as well. If you want to discuss any of this or other topics further, or if you'd just like to find out a bit more about Turnkey's RM service offerings, I hope you all gain some value from the remaining sessions today. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.